The story of La Haine centres around three characters, Saïd, Vinz and Hubert, and we see them in the day of their lives where they live, who they interact with, what they do, and all of this is set on the day after a riot has happened. We don't see the riot or know what the reasons for it were specifically, we only see the aftermath and how it affects our three protagonists. Most importantly, the tension between Vinz and Hubert, of which Saïd is the observer as a stand-in for us, the audience. Throughout the film, Vinz expresses a desire to kill a police officer to get back at them for what they have done to his community. He is the primary embodiment of hatred for which the film is named. Hubert, on the other hand, is the voice of reason, a more humble character, who has a good relationship with his family and his friends. Despite this, he also shown to have the capability for violence and law-breaking. He questions Vinz on what his hatred and violence would achieve. Where does this path lead to? This brings me to the central theme or philosophy of La Haine. What is the proper response to hatred?
Evolution cannot avoid bringing intelligent life ultimately to an awareness of one thing and one thing above all else. That one thing is futility.
Futility. La Haine shows us time and time again the futility of our petty quarrels. Consider the story that is told of the man falling out of a burning building, and on his way to the bottom he is repeating the ironic mantra, "So far so good, so far so good." Futility is hammered home here, as just like the man falling to his death, what is the point of the progress you make if you're going to end up in the same place? Notice how this can be a pessimistic philosophy when thought of like this, but also as an antidote to hatred. The philosophical antecedents of this is drawing from an existentialist philosophy, particularly absurdism. This is most closely associated with the French philosopher Albert Camus, especially in the essay The Myth of Sisyphus. He talks about the absurd being the human need to attribute meaning to life and the unreasonable silence of the universe in response. This can be seen in La Haine from breaks in following our protagonists to wide shots of their setting or the city or even the whole world as we see in the first shot, expressing how small and irrelevant we are in the grand scheme of things. The following is a clip of an essay called The Human Crisis by Albert Camus, discussing the loss of faith in any ideology or purpose in the context of a post-World War II Europe. So it's no surprise that this philosophy trickled down into French culture a few decades later.
Features of this crisis are the will to power, terror, the replacement of real man by political and historical man, the reign of abstraction and fatality, and solitude without a future, then these are the features we have to change if we want to resolve the crisis. Our generation found itself faced with this immense problem and all that it negated. We had to draw the strength to fight from these very negations. It was perfectly useless to tell us, you must believe in God, or in Plato, or in Marx, precisely because we did not have that kind of faith. The only question was whether we were going to accept a world in which we could only be a victim or an executioner. Of course, we wanted to be neither, because we knew in the bottom of our hearts that this distinction was an illusion, and that when it came down to it, there were only victims, since killing and being killed would amount to the same thing in the end. The murderers and the murdered would all eventually suffer the same defeat. The problem was no longer whether to accept or reject this condition and this world, but rather to know what reason we might have to oppose it. This is why we have looked for our reasons in the very revolt that led us, for no apparent reason, to choose to fight evil.
The murderers and the murdered would all eventually suffer the same defeat. This seems to be the final point of the film, as Hubert is standing off with the policeman and the camera closes in on Saïd as our proxy for the audience. Lastly, my favourite way in which the theme of futility comes through is the cryptic story of the old man in the bathroom who interrupts Vinz and Hubert right at the height of their argument. We often see these moments in films that are summing up the protagonist's dilemma or prediction of their fate in the form of a dream or cautionary tale, a style that goes back to Homeric epics and is still used frequently today in films or books such as Deathly Hallows and Harry Potter, or Kafka's work The Trial, which also explores similar themes.
Tu viens de braquer un truc avec un plein de flics qui ont pu te faire tuer lui aussi.
Ça fait vraiment du bien de chier un coup. Vous croyez en Dieu? Il ne faut pas se demander si on croit en Dieu, mais si Dieu croit en nous. J'avais un ami qui s'appelait Grunwaldski. On était déportés ensemble en Sibérie. Quand on va en Sibérie, dans les camps de travail, on voyage dans le train à bestiaux qui traverse la steppe glacée pendant des journées entières sans croiser personne. On se tient chaud ensemble. Mais le problème, c'est que pour se soulager, pour chier, c'est pas possible dans un wagon. Et le seul moment où on s'arrêtait, c'était pour mettre l'eau dans la locomotive. Mais Grunwaldski était très pris. Même quand nous devions nous laver ensemble, il était très gêné. Et moi, je me moquais souvent de lui à cause de ça. Donc, le train s'arrête et tout le monde en profite pour aller chier derrière le wagon. Et moi, j'ai tellement embêté Grunwaldski avec ça. Il préférait aller un peu plus loin. Donc, le train repart, tout le monde y sort dedans, car le train, il n'attend pas. Le problème, c'est que Grunwaldski s'est éloigné derrière un buisson. Il n'avait pas fini de chier. Alors, je le vois, il sort de derrière un buisson, en tenant son pantalon dans sa main pour ne pas qu'il tombe. Il a essayé d'attraper le train. Je le tends la main. Mais chaque fois, quand il me tend les siennes, il lâche son pantalon, il tombe sur ses chevilles. Il remonte ses pantalons, il reprend sa course. Et chaque fois, son pantalon il tombe quand il me tend la main.
Et alors, après, qu'est-ce qui s'est passé?
Rien. Grunwaldski est mort de froid. Au revoir. Au revoir. Au revoir.
Pourquoi il nous a raconté ça?
While this story appears cryptic on the first watch, in the context of Futility, it makes a lot more sense. The man who is so nervous about relieving himself, and whose primary concern was to avoid being socially ostracized, missed the train for his worries and eventually froze to death. It is not about the journey, but where you end up. And if we all end up dying in the end, we should not worry so much about something as trivial as embarrassment. And what's more to the point of the film, we should not worry about something so futile as hatred.
L'important, c'est pas la chute, c'est l'atterrissage.